Good morning. I had an opportunity yesterday to visit with someone who I think has a very unique perspective in what is happening with some of the racial tension, police brutality, and some of the challenges that a lot of our friends are facing. I was having a conversation recently, actually earlier this week, with a friend of mine who happens to be a black woman, and we were talking about the Derek Chauvin trial, the verdict, how that made her feel. We also discussed the young 16-year-old girl who was attacking another girl with a knife, and a police officer shot the girl and killed her. And in the course of the discussion, I said, it's got to be really tough to be a police officer in that situation and have to make literally a life or death decision in a matter of seconds. And my friend said, it's a very difficult time to be a black person in America. And our guest today has insight into both of those perspectives. And so I'm glad you could join me on today's episode of Coffee with Chuck. I'm excited to have Topeka police officer Tim Bell joining me this afternoon. And he is going to tell us a little bit about himself. But first of all, welcome, Officer Bell, to the program.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Just tell us a little bit about where you grew up, a little bit about your kind of dreams or ambitions as a child, and then how you decided to pursue a career in law enforcement, and then what that career path looked like for you.
Absolutely. So I was born and raised here in Topeka, Kansas. Grew up on 4th and Swaggart, if anybody's familiar with that area. And then I was fortunate enough to watch my mom and dad work very hard to kind of raise us out of a social economic level to a little bit of a better location, and up from there. And really that's kind of where the work ethic was first put in place, able to see all that and see what it takes for that to happen. And my mom and dad were both, my dad was a firefighter, so being a public servant, and my mom was a social worker. So kind of watching them always be so giving, caring of other people and things like that has always left an impression on me. So kind of figured out that one day I probably would end up helping people, because that's kind of just what is in my family's DNA. So once I was able to get to the high school level and whatnot, I was fortunate enough to be blessed to run track and field and have a pretty good career in that, instilling the eyes of that my work ethic and whatnot, that was able to excel me to the level that I was able to go to college for it. And then shortly after that, though, I kind of joined the workforce and started having a lot of interaction with law enforcement due to working at Walmart as asset protection. We're the guys who sneak around watching people trying to live. So the detectives would always come and just let me know, like, man, you do really good reports. And we need somebody like you who knows how to talk to people and who can write and talk to people the way you do. So at the time, one of the officers who really left an impression on me, and for people who are here in Topeka, David Gogan, he was one of the officers that we lost a couple of years ago into an officer-involved shooting. I really considered him one of my mentors because he would just come and shoot the can at Walmart with us a lot, and really left an impression, because you kind of have the misconception that as a police officer, you kind of always have to be hard, but the way that he treated people with respect, and that he was nice to people and still fair, I was like, okay, well, I guess I do have a spot here, because it's hard pressed to get me angry. So being able to be nice and treat people with dignity, I was like, man, that's awesome. If I can do that in this job, I'm gonna run with that. So really, once that door got open, I was able to actually get on the police force and see that, the culture is a lot different than I think people have ideas of. So being on the inside of it and realizing that as an individual officer, you can make a pretty big difference, felt pretty good to see.
So you went to college, you ran track, and then did you go right to Walmart to work, or did you go to Walmart to work in asset protection because you thought, well, maybe that's something that could lead to something else? Or were you, what led you to Walmart? And then I understand the interaction with the officers kind of led to pursuing the career outside of Walmart. But I mean, was it a situation where I need a job because I got to pay the bills and this is one that interests me? But I mean, is that kind of how you got there? And then one thing led to another?
Yes, sir. So when I was done with track, I actually came back to attend Washburn University. And I walked onto the football team, and one of the guys who's working on the football team, he worked at Walmart, and I was trying to pay my own way at the time, and didn't take out a loan at the time. I was just working through Washburn's financing. For those who are going to go to college and food, you'll get very familiar with that. So yeah, I was going to pay my own way through and pay some stuff off. So yeah, I joined the workforce that route to pay for education.
Okay. And so how old approximately were you then when you had the conversations with the police officers or the detectives and decided that you wanted to make that transition and pursue full-time law enforcement?
I was 20 at the time.
Okay. So still college age.
Yep, still college age. And most departments require you to be 21. There are still a few in rural areas that you could be 18 and do it. But here, particularly in Topeka, require you to be 21 years old.
Okay. And you talked about maybe some misperceptions of the culture of the police force and law enforcement that one individual or maybe others have kind of changed in your mind. And so you made that decision to pursue it. What was the next step? So what was the training like? And then how did you actually get into the job?
Yes, sir. So for us, we have what's called I believe it's a post-pat test where they're going to test your physical agility and endurance and your educational aptitude. It's not that extensive of a test, but, they'll test your basic math, writing, and reading comprehension skills. The physical aspect, because it is a pretty physically demanding job initially. So then once that happens, then you're giving a conditional job offer if you complete those steps and you meet the criteria. And then from there, that's when actually the background check and whatnot, and going into actually investigating to see what kind of person you are to fit into that police department actually takes place at that point. You're not even giving an application until after that test. So at that point, for me, it was about a 6-month process after taking that initial test. And then after that 6 months was concluded and they finished the background check and things like that. And it's pretty extensive. They will reach out to every single person you put as a reference. They'll interview those people. And I would say that we probably go above and beyond making sure we have the right people at our department. So I like seeing that. That really told me I was making the right decision, that they really wanted to vet and make sure you're a good person. And then from there, after that 6 months was concluded and I was hired, and now that's when you start the police academy. The police academy, as far as classroom time for us, was 6 months. So during this 6 months, you're learning all of your state laws, your city ordinances. And for us, something I'm particularly proud about is that we're very extensive here in Topeka about our mental health, which we call crisis intervention training. That's a very big part of what we do. to learning how to deal with subjects who may be going through a mental health crisis. So that's a very big part of our academy. And then once that written portion, that classroom portion is done with the academy, then you'll enter what's called the field training phase. So that's a 6-month phase as well, where you'll be on the streets with the field training officer. You'll experience all 3 shifts. So you'll go to first shift, second shift, and third shift. And really that's when you start getting your skills honed and applying what you learned in the classroom. Now you're applying it to the streets with a veteran officer who's there to show you the right way of how things are supposed to be done. And then on top of that, once you're released on your own, you're actually under a 6-month probationary period, where that way we can see if the training that you got, are you applying it properly? And once you make it past that point, then now you're pretty much good to go.
At that point, then, when you're kind of on your own, what options do you have? Do they say, okay, you're going to be in this area, or what were you given a patrol area? What options are available, and how do you kind of work your way through that process?
Yes, sir. So, we're a paramilitary organization. So, which means, you're going to have your sergeants, lieutenants, and things like that. So typically what's going to happen is you can bid for a shift, which you're putting your name in a hat to see what shift you can get, but it's based off seniority. So the majority of the time as a newer officer, you're going to get sent to second shift, which those hours vary depending on what department you're at. So you're going to be a patrolman starting out. And, as far as your job description, we're asked to enforce traffic laws and things like that and respond to calls. That's our biggest job is responding to calls for service. If we have time to do traffic stops and things like that, and I think that's one of the misconceptions to get out of the way. There's no traffic quota. Like our job is to actually take calls and help people. So that traffic stop type of stuff, that's if we have time, but most of the time we don't have that time. So but yeah, that's what's typically going to happen once you're released out of that FTO phase and you're on your own. Typically as a young officer, you're going to be on the busiest shift, which is second shift, and you'll be a patrolman there. Really one of the parts about our culture that I love, and really probably what made me gravitate towards it as always being a team player, is that we are a team. So if you're a newer officer and you're struggling and not knowing necessarily how to work a call the correct way, I've been doing this job for 10 years and I still got questions. So you're always going to have something that you need to rely on someone for. So being able to call a veteran officer to come over and help you work things out is very valuable.
And just for clarification, you mentioned that this varies from force to force, but in Topeka, is second shift like 3 to 11, or what is second shift? What are those?
Yes, sir. That's the typical range you'll see. 1 to 9, 10 to 2, or 2 to 10, and things like that. So
okay,
between those.
Okay. We've mentioned culture a few times, and at least here in Topeka, you really appreciate kind of the teamwork, and certainly that's something in JAG K we try to hire for, a culture of an ideal team player. When you were growing up, what you said you had maybe a little bit of a misconception or misperception about culture. Were there any other things growing up as a Black man in Topeka? Did you have any other concerns about the police, law enforcement in general, or was that ever an issue with you as a young person?
I probably have a little bit different perspective than most African-American men, particularly on this, but I was never really necessarily raised that way. My dad and my mom always really pushed character over all else. Like if you're doing the right thing, being in the right place when you're supposed to be, typically things are going to work out, and then your good character will take care of the rest. Even if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, people are going to figure out that, like, okay, that we can see by the way he carries himself and his character that what he's saying is probably true. So For us and my siblings and my family, that was just always kind of the way and the dichotomy of how we looked at law enforcement. And of course, for us, it's respecting our elders and our authority figures. So it was never an issue for us to see the police, and when they were in our community, know that, okay, like they're here doing a job. Typically, they're here just supposed to be helping us. So we always just kind of embraced that and appreciated it. So even growing up and seeing sometimes when there was misconduct that we could blatantly obvious in the law enforcement community, I was still able to compartmentalize and realize, at all walks of life in all society, there's going to be people who don't follow what we're supposed to do. So I've always had that idea in my head, even within law enforcement. So especially getting inside of it and being a part of the culture, I can see we have the vast majority of us, we're good people, and we just want to do the best that we can do. And we realize that, yeah, there's going to be guys who mess up and whatnot. And to an extent, we have to own that, because it is part of our organization as far as law enforcement as a whole, that, yeah, we're going to make mistakes, and it's up to us to realize we got to fix those.
So and obviously this has been a huge topic of discussion, certainly over the past year, with all of the focus in the Chauvin trial recently.
Yes, sir.
So what can and what have you all been doing as law enforcement, and what can the community do conversely to try to kind of bridge that maybe gap of misunderstanding? Or I'm not sure. I know there have been efforts in a lot of communities to do that, but maybe just specifically here in Topeka, what has been done, and maybe this is an ongoing effort, but prior to all of what we've kind of all been through as a nation here the last year, what are some things law enforcement can do, and what are some things that citizens can do to kind of have a better understanding of each other's role?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I think first and foremost, particularly for law enforcement, we've got to stop hitting our head in the sand when it comes to some of the negative history that we have. We don't have the benefit of being able to have revisionist history. History is history. The real history and the role that law enforcement has played in some of the issues of the African-American community, these are real things. These are facts that we can study and look up and see, but not acting like they never existed and going to get us anywhere. So that would be my first route of trying to bridge that gap as far as within our culture, is like, hey, we gotta realize and own up to certain things, but now we have to be on the forefront and courageous, because we are supposed to be the examples in our community. We need to be courageous on trying to rectify some of those mistakes, and some of it, we're not going to be able to without having help from society. So what I would ask from society too is we got to realize that we're all human beings. We're not robots behind this badge. I got a heart that pumps blood just like everybody else. I would never hope that I make a mistake that harms anyone or anything like that. And with adequate training, that shouldn't happen. So I just wish that the community would understand that that's never any of our intentions. And then from there, that we both realize as a society and law enforcement that what we all want at the end of the day is a great community for our kids to grow up in. We all want that. And if we can come to that common ground of, okay, well, how do we work together to do that? I think we can make a lot of progress.
Yeah. What is the most rewarding part of your job?
Particularly within my organization, I run a program called the OK program, and I'm a youth outreach officer. So the OK program is the Our Kids program, and it's a mentorship program for African-American boys 12 to 18. So I could be here all day telling you about these young men and watching them succeed. But one of the things that I require for these young men is to maintain a 2.5 GPA, no more than 3 tardies in a grading period, and not getting sent to the office. And seeing how many of these young men are at standards now because they want to, and because they're pretty courageous. If you think about where we are in today's climate, for these young men to want to be a part of a program with a law enforcement officer, despite the ridicule they may get from their friends or things like that, they stepped up to the plate, realized, hey, I want to do this to help better my grades and help better my home life and things like that. So watching how courageous these young men are and wanting to do better has been very rewarding.
How many officers are involved in this, and are you at capacity? I mean, if we had students that wanted to participate, are there options available for them? And if so, how would they go about participating in the program?
Yes, sir. I am actually the only officer who runs it here in Topeka. And as of right now, just due to COVID and whatnot, have been pretty, for lack of a better term, have been stagnant. I haven't increased them too much like that. The program can't run fully right now just due to the social distancing guidelines and things like that. In lieu of that, if that didn't exist, God willing that we get past all that, my doors are open. There's no set limit of how many kids that I can take on. So if anyone is interested, they can reach out to me at tbell@okprogram.org, or you can find me at Highland Park High School or Eisenhower Middle School.
Got it. Great. Okay. And so conversely, what are some of the biggest challenges? And maybe we've touched on a couple, but what are some of the biggest challenges of a career in law enforcement?
In general, just right now, like I said, the climate and the distrust that people have in law enforcement right now, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's something that's the forefront of everyone's mind right now. So that's one of the biggest difficulties that makes the job pretty tough, is every day feeling like people are after you, or that they don't appreciate you or understand the job. But that kind of comes with the territory. It's honestly always been that way. So you just have to realize that when you stay within your policy, you stay within the law, and you stay within what you're supposed to do, you can overcome those challenges.
If we could, I'd like to spend a little bit more time maybe on the nuts and bolts of the job. And I don't know that there's a typical day, but like, are you on second shift now?
I am actually on first shifts.
Okay. So what, just maybe give us a snapshot of what a day could look like for you.
Sure. So I'll give it from my perspective as the OK program coordinator, and then from a patrolman. So for me in particular, so my day starts the same time that school starts, so 7:30, and then I'll work until 3:30. My typical day, I have a working relationship with the teachers. So once the kid enrolls in the OK program, that gives me access to their and things like that. So typically I go by alphabetical order. I'll check on your grades if you have any missing assignments or anything like that, see if you have any discipline referrals. Once I see that, and I see, for example, I see a Mr. Johnson is missing 2 assignments. So what I'll do is, particularly, I like to put at a PE class. So find him in PE class and talk to him about his missing assignments in science class, and see what we can do about that. Because I'm all about staying on top of what you can control. So that's one aspect of it. And then another is, if I get a teacher who reaches out to me and says, hey, Mr. Johnson's really struggling staying awake in class, or Mr. Johnson's really struggling with he's not eating at lunch or something like that, then at that point, I can figure out, like, I'll talk to him, but then maybe I can reach out to his home as well, and see, like, hey, is everything okay at home? Is there any resources I can give you guys so we can make sure that Mr. Johnson is the best student that he could possibly be? And so really kind of bridging that gap in the community, that these families understand that, man, there's a law enforcement officer who actually loves my kid and wants to come help us as a family. Is pretty rewarding, but that's also, doing my job. So I really appreciate those opportunities. And then for me, particularly on Saturdays, sans COVID, if we didn't have COVID, I bring all the kids together and we go to the gym. And lead them, and I'll bring other African American men from the community in to help mentor the young men. So we typically have a topic of discussion that we'll talk for that day. So topics like me and you were talking about today, police relations and things like that. We'll talk about those type of things. We'll talk about what you should do on a traffic stop from the perspective of a law enforcement officer. We really hit the gamut of a lot of societal issues, and we hit the gamut on personal responsibility type issues too, about being responsible for your education and things like that.
While we're on the topic, and I do want to talk about like a patrolman's day, but what should any person do if they're pulled over by law enforcement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that people should realize about traffic stops is that's actually one of the most dangerous things that I'm going to do in my day. And the reason being is because I have absolutely no idea who's in that vehicle. Contrary to what people typically believe, if I run that tag, that doesn't, just because the owner comes up doesn't necessarily mean that's who's driving it. So stops are very dangerous for us. So what I would ask for anyone is to make your hands visible on the steering wheel. And then, typically we're going to give you a spiel about why we pulled you over, if we're following training properly. And then from there, we're going to ask you for your identification. So from there, that's just really the main thing, is letting us see your hands and where they're at. That's going to make us more comfortable, and it's going to keep you safer in the long run. And really, it's all just about a safety issue. Traffic stops, like I said, are most of the time are what law enforcement officers are harmed on. So we just try to conduct those as safely as possible.
And if you're a concealed carrier, do you tell the officer as soon as they approach the vehicle, or how should someone handle that?
Yeah, I would definitely, so after the officer introduces himself, let you know why you're pulled over and whatnot, while you still have your hands on the steering wheel, I would definitely, when he asks you to get your ID, would definitely inform him that, hey, I'm a concealed carry holder. This is where my firearm's at. And just let us know that. And typically, it's not illegal for you to have even open carry here in Kansas. So just let us know that. And so we're not thinking anything out of the ordinary, and it'll be good from there.
Okay. And so now what would a tip, I don't know if typical, but what would a patrolman's day possibly look like?
Yes, sir. So at the start of our shift, what we're asked to do, because we all share vehicles, so we're going to inspect our vehicles to make sure nothing was left behind or anything like that. So that's how our day is starting off, making sure our vehicle's up to working order. And then from there, like I said, our primary function as patrolmen is not traffic stops. It is waiting for calls of service. So typically that's going to be your daily routine. You're driving around in your patrol area, waiting for a call to service. You're going to be split up into patrol areas around the city, and some areas are more busy than others. And typically, you should have a little bit of pride in the area that you work, and be familiar with your community. So if that's business contacts, things like that, if you have some downtime, good patrolmen will make time to go learn about those people and their businesses and things like that. But typically for a patrolman, that's what your day consists of, is just call to services left and right, just trying to keep the city safe and help people make reports.
Is there one particular service over another that seems to dominate most of your day? Like, I don't know, people with emergency health issues, or I mean, what is there, or crimes, or what is there one that seems to take up more of your time than another, or does it just vary on your patrol area and just the full moon or something? I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, no, it definitely is going to depend on where you work. So for an example, if you work West Topeka, as you know, that's where most of our retail businesses are. So if you're an officer who works that area, you're probably more likely to deal with shoplifters and things of that nature. So that may be a call for them that takes up a lot of time. But then for maybe an officer who works here in East Topeka, maybe alarm call is what they respond to more often, just as an example. Now, as far as time consumption on those calls, our most time consuming calls, probably traffic accidents. Traffic accidents take a little while to get mitigated out. So, but everything else just kind of varies on the extent.
Okay. If I'm in high school and I'm thinking about a career in law enforcement, what can I do now to try to prepare for that? You said 21 is the
Yes,
age
sir.
in a lot of police forces or departments. Maybe in rural areas, it could be earlier than that. But what should I do now to try to be ready for that type of career?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So first and foremost, if that's something that is really on your mind, you've got to particularly realize that right now the actions that I take actually could have ramifications on that career. And I don't want to sound doom and gloom, but when they're looking at certain things, especially like I said, how extensive the background check is, they may come talk to a teacher from your high school, and try to find out what kind of person you are. So if you're a person of character who wants to step up to the plate and come help your community, that starts now if you're planning on it. So what I would typically recommend, so once you're out of high school, a lot of departments don't require a degree, but I would still go that route. And this may sound weird, but I would not get a degree in criminal justice because we have a high turnover rate. And you're kind of shoehorning yourself into a career that you may not you might not be privy to. So I always recommend, if you do get a degree, get it outside of law enforcement, so you have something to fall back on. And then from there, start that process as soon as you can to get hired. Like I mentioned, it took me 6 months to get hired for just the background check, but I actually believe it took 4 months before they even got to my background check. So you're almost talking almost a whole year before I was even admitted into an academy. So it takes some time. So definitely get it in as early as you can, and work from there. And then that's just really the biggest piece of advice I can give, is that interview process for it kind of starts now while you're 17, 18, 16 years old. Especially if you want to start around 21, they're definitely looking at those years to see what kind of person you are.
And what I assume the physical aspect was not an issue for you, since you were running track and all that kind of stuff. But what are maybe 2 or 3 really important attributes a person should have to be successful? You said there was a lot of turnover. What are the 2 or 3 attributes that are going to give you the best chance for success in a career in law enforcement?
Being able to talk to people. That's the biggest reasons for uses of force and things like that, is when you don't know how to talk to somebody and you don't know how to adapt to different cultures and things like that. It leads to a lot of issues. So not being afraid to talk to people and humanize people is definitely a huge trait. And I would say that's the number one trait that is the difference between a bad officer and a good officer. If you know how to talk to people and make them feel respected, even if you don't agree with what they're doing or going on, if that person feels that you respected them and talk to them in a professional manner, you can get through a lot in this job. So that's my number one trait that I think makes a great officer. And I actually would say that's number 2. I think number 1 is compassion. You have to be compassionate about the people who are in your community that you're protecting, or the adopted community, because a lot of police officers come from other places that's not their community. So whatever adopted community you're a part of, you got to have a heart to be compassionate about those people that you want to help take care of.
Great. Are there any other words of advice or just general comments to our JAG-K students across the state of Kansas as we kind of finish up here today?
Sure. Yeah, I can, I'm sure anybody who's watching the news right now and seeing what's going on across the nation probably have a little bit of trepidation about the future, because not quite sure, what direction we're going to go, particularly if you are looking at a career in law enforcement. But what I would say right now is you just gotta realize that, the United States is one of the few fully multicultural nations in the world. So the way I kind of liken it is that if your grandma's making a stew, you may not like a certain ingredient, you may not like celery, but once she puts all those ingredients together and it starts heating up and it's got to boil and come to that point that once those ingredients melt and come together, it's a great, great dinner that you're going to have. So I think we're in that heating up point. I think that's where we're at in the nation, but I think afterwards we're going to have something delicious and beautiful for everybody. So just wait it out, watch what we're going to do your part to make sure you're trying to make the world a better place. And I think we can get through with everything we're going through right now.
Great. Well, Officer Bell, thank you so much for your service, first and foremost, and then secondly, for joining us here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
And with that, enjoy your coffee.
Thank you, sir.